And hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 13 of the HOU.SEC Cast, the HOU.SEC.CON podcast. Sam and I today are talking to Dan Gunter over at Insane Forensics. He's the founder and CEO of Insane Forensics. And we talk about threat hunting and IT and OT environments. We talk about Dan's background, and we talk about some of the Chinese hacking groups getting taken down by the U.S., and they're going against critical infrastructure. So yes, this is another OT talk, but it's really good talk. Think you'll enjoy it. See you on there. All right, Sam, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm good. It's been a busy beginning of the year. That's good. I'd rather be busy than sitting around twiddling my thumbs.
Or unemployed. That's
This
the
is
other
true
option.
too.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, it has been rough out there in the industry. Still some weird things happening. So we'll keep posting those cyber jobs out there, trying to help people out though. See what we can do.
There's a lot. There's every once in a while, I see some good stuff popping up. Definitely keep resharing those out on LinkedIn. It's good stuff.
Yep. Well, we've got a special guest today. I think you know Mr. Gunter.
I know Dan Gunter, and I am pleased to say I've worked with him before. So, and he jumped ship to go do his own awesome thing. So, really excited to have him on the show today.
How you doing, Dan?
Good. Thanks for having me. It's great being here.
Yeah, glad you could join us again. And everybody knows you were a speaker at HOU.SEC.CON. At least most people. Well, let me back up on that. If you just started listening to the HOU.SEC cast, we have most of our speakers from last year on, and it's great material. They get to expand and expound upon their topics. And Dan was a speaker. You talked about threat hunting differences in IT and OT environments. So I'm excited to talk about that in the main segment.
Yeah. No, we're excited. We're also excited for HOU.SEC.CON. I mean, we're so we've been last year's. This is our first year sponsoring, so we'll be there again.
Awesome. And you're the company is Insane Forensics.
Yep, right. Insane Forensics, and we're actually down the road. I know y'all are Houston. We're San Antonio, so we also have this I-10 connection.
Well, thanks, Dan, for joining us. We'll get into HOU.SEC.CON segment and news segment, and then we'll talk to you about all things Dan Gunter and Insane Forensics in your talk. So talking about HOU.SEC.CON, a little bit of update. Sam, I think you've got an update that you want to talk about.
Yeah, so HOU.SEC.CON specifically, we have the call for papers going out. That'll start on May 1st, and we're going to let that stay open. We're going to have a shorter window this year, primarily just because we had such a good response in the past. We kind of need to put some rails on it, give us some time to select the talks. But we're going to have a 30-day. So it'll at the end of May is when we will close. So if you put that on your calendar, put a little alert up there to go submit your talk and be part of our community there on May 1st.
Absolutely. I like the idea of us getting a smaller window so we give people more time when we get them selected. But yeah, don't think it's the old 2 months that we used to have. It's only a month. Speaking of that too, we still got sponsorships open. Jump on that if you're organization and thank you, Dan, for sponsoring. But if you want to sponsor, please jump on quickly. You can go to our website. I won't give out his email on the public forum like this, but you can go to our website and contact for sponsorship. But our sponsor wrangler, Gary, is sitting by waiting for your phone call or your email to sponsor. We've got a lot of sponsors. We're going to have a full-blown vendor hall this year. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have some really cool stuff in it, and we're getting bigger and growing, and we're going to do some cool stuff. So if you want to sponsor that, please let us know. We've also got one conference near and dear to Sam's heart coming up in April.
HOU.SEC.CON. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So April 30th, I'm just in the middle of finalizing all the speakers and everything. It's really going to be a great conference, especially, for both sides of the coin, if you will. So the the cyber practitioners along with the plant folks. So have quite a few of the plant folks signing up, which is super exciting because this is really going to help drive that conversation and build those relationships between those two groups. So, and the content of that for that conference is also going to be very conducive to that conversation. So really excited about that.
Yep, very excited for that. And then we've got EXEC.SEC.CON coming up, just like it sounds, executive type of conversations, but we're not limiting it just to C-level folks. We've got security managers, security directors coming in there that can still have those conversations and that want to grow into having those conversations too as their careers get accelerated. So look for both of those. And then we launched the user group also. So that is the first one's on February 29th. And for those of you who have signed up, we have actually filled it up from an accepted standpoint, but we haven't filled it up from a registration standpoint. So if you have been accepted to it, remember it's a two-step process. You get accepted to go to it, and then you have to actually sign up and register for it. The reason we did that, and we did the same thing with OT and EXEC.SEC.CON, is we want real practitioners in there. No offense to salespeople, because Sam is one, but that's basically we want it to be filled with practitioners so they can have conversations and not have the some of the stress and pressure and all of that stuff. So
yeah, and the two-step process is important because I don't think we made it clear enough to begin. It's on us,
Yep.
right? So be sure to go back and look. If you are accepted, go in and finalize your registration. And really, the biggest part there is kind of the comfort level, right? It's really dear to our hearts, to Michael's and my heart, that we create these conferences to be, you know, a good environment for these conversations to happen, right? We want that focus of the conversation to happen each of these as we move along. So and as we get bigger and those things grow, if HOU.SEC.CON and EXEC.SEC.CON do well, we'll have bigger opportunities and maybe some more opportunities in the future. But for now, just trying to make sure we have the right practitioners in the room to make sure everyone's getting as much as they can out of it.
Yep, absolutely. So, and just so you know, for the OT and EXEC.SEC.CON, seating is limited to about 100, and then about 40 for the user group. So we're trying to keep those small to start, and then we'll expand those as we can later on. But these are the first ones that we're doing, so we're just trying to get people in there, have good conversations, and then we'll expand as we need to. So, all right. Anything else, Sam, for you on the update?
That's it. Let's start talking to Dan because I'm excited.
Yeah, let's start talking to Dan. I don't want to talk about just us. Let's do it. Okay. Well, news segment, and Dan did give us this article to talk about it. So I'll summarize it real quick. So in Reuters, they came out with an article all around the U.S. disabling. I'm just going to read the title, and Dan, I'll let you dig all into the weeds. U.S. disabled Chinese hacking network targeting critical infrastructure. That's always a really big topic. And I think we talked about pre-show, Dan, about the Senate hearings that have been happening with CISA and everything else. We'll include a link to those as well. But give us a rundown on this and let us know what you're thinking about it, and we'll discuss.
Yeah, and so this is a super timely article because you look at active known nation state groups that are doing things against industrial networks, and everyone brings up kind of the Ukraine 2015, 2016 sandworm, that cluster. But another one that, this really all started, I think it was back in March of this year, Microsoft put out the initial report on Volt Typhoon, right? Which was a living on the land style attack. At that time, actually, Microsoft and the US government was like, hey, this is Chinese government or some affiliation thereof. And what's interesting is back then they put it out and they're like, hey, watch out for this. We know this is going on. What's interesting is this week, the government put out a notice that was like, hey, not just are we telling you that there's this group out there that's going against critical infrastructure. This week, they're like, and we're starting to kind of unwind parts of them that we know about. So I spent the early part of my career in the Air Force. I've been around government circles. This is a pretty big deal for the government to kind of move from, hey, we're going to kind of keep this secret, keep this in a low channel, to, hey, we're going to start to take this down. Because, from that perspective, not just is it that legitimate side, but there's certainly that side of like, okay, they were probably about to do stuff, or there was stuff that, kind of created the urgency to go there. So really interesting article, both as a continuation of, the living on the land techniques, which are hard to find, but also showing, right, it's kind of a win that we at least have a setback in groups that are targeting industrial spaces, right?
So what do you think the motivation is then for the government to be vocal about it? I mean, there was the FBI and the head of FBI and CISA were both on that hearing yesterday, or from time of the recording, right? So I'm a little cynical at times with some of this, having watched it on this, a little bit. But what do you think is the motivation?
Yeah, I mean, I think to that point, and again, I'm just speculating here. I think to that point, some of it comes down to urgency. At the same time, they have a calculation to where they're burning, like, right, in the military, we had this thing called intel gain loss. How long do you look at something and learn from it before you actually do something? So at some point, that intel gain loss threshold made it to where they made the decision to be like, hey, we're going to do something and we're going to tell everyone about it, right? Um, and so certainly there's the cynical side. At the same time, there's the IGL kind of concerns there. And then there's the side of when they announce this, right? When they indict people, there have been indictments against, PLA military, against Russian military by the US. When they do that, there's actual like geopolitical and the relationship between country impact, right? So generally with that, it's done with a lot of reasons that we'll at least never know about on the outside openly, right? But it's a pretty big deal.
Can I be even more cynical and say this is an election year?
This is why we're friends, Michael.
Exactly. It doesn't matter what
it's
side
going to
of the
be a
aisle
busy
you're
year
on.
for us, right? With the elections, with everything going on. I mean, we're a connected society. There's no going back.
The less cynical side of me almost celebrates that because it's an election year, they're talking about this and seeing cybersecurity changes as a positive thing to get them elected. That to me is almost a win, even though it sucks, but it's still a win. Does that make sense?
Well, the win too, in my opinion, is like the fact that you're seeing tangibles. The public, the general public, we see a lot because we're in the industry. We have a lot of back channel, but to see it in the public and my neighbors and family and whatnot seeing, yes, this is real, right? Is kind of is a personal win in one way, but in also it helps us across the board because boards are fighting, figuring out how are we going to fund these things and all this other stuff. CISOs are really at that the front line of that battle, trying to get the funding. Things like this help, right, on those things. And so, I go back to thinking like just being able to go get my cup of water here at the sink or turn on my lights and, my internet connection here. Right. So those are important. And
wait a minute, you use the sink for water?
Yeah. Hey man, this is good water. Look, Texas water. It's all good. You live just up the block from me. What are you talking about? I don't have a third hand growing out of my head yet. So
you don't have a water filter? Oh my gosh. Okay. Sam and I can't be friends anymore.
I trust my water utility.
Okay. Well, guys, we're at the end of this segment, so I'm going to call the ball on that one, but it's a great article. We'll include the link there as we always do. And then we'll include the link to they kind of like a press package that the Senate Select Committee put out on that stuff. So we'll probably just link to that. It's kind of cool because it gives like a breakdown of the different pieces and shows you some notes. So it gives you some more stuff. At the same time, cynical me also is like, this is for the press. What are they putting out? That's the good stuff and not the bad stuff. So, but anyway, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Sam. Great conversation. That's a great article. And now we are going to go on our regularly scheduled break. And then when we come back, we will get into the main segment. So see you on the other side. All right, and we are back from break, and we are going to talk all things about Mr. Dan Gunter. So Dan, before we get into your talk about at HOU.SEC.CON, give us a rundown of what got you in the industry, what got you excited about getting in the industry. Were you a child prodigy or did you come by this later? All the good things.
Yeah, so I started coming up through the university traditional kind of route. So I went to Baylor University just up the road here in Texas. Go Bears! And started out as Baylor, obviously comp sci grad. Did ROTC there, so always was kind of headed in the Air Force direction. My first foray into cybersecurity was there was this internship called the ACE program, the Advanced Course in Engineering Cybersecurity Boot Camp up at AFRL up in Rome, New York. And it was basically a summer to where you're getting the glorious $7 a day pay that the Air Force can pay cadets. The only employer that can probably pay someone $7 a day and get away with it. But more valuable than the $7 a day was really getting really getting a deep view into cybersecurity as a space, right? Because when I went to school, there weren't cybersecurity degrees like there are today. Even today, you know, there's definitely a spectrum of, okay, is this a cyber degree that's more policy and kind of a business one, or is this a more technical one? Back then, it was all just comp sci, right? So, where we picked up kind of that core was doing things like going to the Air Force Research Lab and spending a summer there learning cyber. When I started career, went into the Air Force, started at the Air Force CERT. So, in a SOC operation with 2.5 billion endpoints, 800,000 users, and you have 22-year-old Dan in charge of an ops floor from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. of analysts looking at that, right? So very quickly, something from the military you appreciate, which is huge responsibility thrown on 22-year-olds straight out of college. Learned a lot at that assignment. I mean, we had wars going on in 2 countries. We were like looking at all of global Air Force defense at that time, really. Rest of the Air Force time went to the dark side a bit, was someone else's APT bit, learned a lot there. Got out of the Air Force actually in 2017, joined a small company called Dragos with Sam. So I was employee number like 8 or 9 over there. I was actually the first talk analyst under Ben, and so claim to fame on Dragos days. But did pro serve over there, grew up the R&D side, doing a lot of reverse engineering, control system research type stuff. Then got the itch in 2020 to move on, to kind of do my own thing. We saw a gap in the market, and so we created Insane Forensics. And what we do now is we're really focused on, they're great detection platforms. What happens though is, the problem is there's a lot great at detecting, and then everything goes to like people manually doing incident response or manually threat hunting. It's hard to get through host and network logs. So now what we do is a lot of that, building product, providing services, just in a lot of interesting places. And so my whole career, it's been a mix of doing very technical work and also leading teams of awesome people doing that. And so, how I started getting into cyber, that was kind of my path. And it's fun now though, seeing as things have changed and as people come in, there's a lot of paths, right? Mine's just one of many.
Awesome. Yeah, there are a lot of paths. I mean, we talked to like Phil Wiley when he does his show. He was doing that hacker factory back in the day, and he started realizing that there were a ton of different paths. It's not just hacking paths. So a lot of people do different things to get into it. So it's always good to talk about that history and how you got to it. I will forgive you for being in the Air Force. That's okay. But no, a lot of smart folks over in the Air Force doing that. So you were doing just Air Force security itself. You weren't in a group that was, because Air Force is known for also doing wider security across the whole country and stuff. So
yeah, so initially it was with Air Force, and then I spent some time. We actually stood up one of the CyberCom offensive teams for a little bit, and so jumped a little bit on some of the joint stuff too. So, yeah. But what I appreciated on the Air Force, for anyone considering it or watching, is you get that deep view on like, okay, what is the big challenge of a 2.5 billion endpoint network securing that look like? And then, okay, what's the challenge? What do offensive operations really look like, right? And it's hard to find employers that you can legally do that, right? Because there's a lot of stuff to where like the only way you get that exposure sometimes is through either being active duty or being civil service or a contractor. And so it's a great place to do it. Especially here, back to the Texas thing, especially here in San Antonio. They always need good people.
Well, that's a great point. So to your talk though, can you talk a little bit about what got you excited to submit that talk? It was a great talk. Again, the recording will be linked here in the session, but tell us a little bit of background of what drove your initiative to go put that together for us.
Talk. I mean, threat hunting is an interesting area, right? Because you have kind of the focus on detection and the like, hey, let me just buy a product and maybe wait for one day for it to alert. The reality is today, right, to our news segment section, if you go with that strategy, it's more likely if you actually get popped by another country, it's going to be at your doorstep and give you some very uncomfortable news, or you're going to get that ransomware note maybe through someone else, right? And so, when we look at threat hunting, and this has been something I've been working on actually the last few years, a lot of published blogs, a lot of open areas on that, but it's, how do we improve our level of threat hunting to get a little more proactive, A, and then B, actually get deeper into industrial networks. And so, with the talk, the really exciting thing was taking the area of plant maintenance networks, which is still an area that a lot of asset owners either haven't looked at, they might have looked at it, or they're taking the word of just the vendors on what it looks like, right? So, how do you take a theory like threat hunting and not just kind of listen to best practices that might be in manuals, but say, hey, based on my environment, based on what's going here, how do I use this terrain and my knowledge of it to my, advantage, and to really be able to find those sophisticated threats out there, right? And by doing that, right, some of it's stuff you can do that might be comparable to both IT and OT. But the other challenge when you get into the OT side is you do have, like, based on certain OEMs, very specific protocols, right? Sometimes very proprietary protocols, right? In our talk, or in the talk that I gave, the other interesting thing was like, okay, let's think about this from an operational perspective. You have maintenance that's being done on this turbine remotely. What does the infrastructure look like for remote maintenance of that turbine? A, you have to understand that technically to do a good threat hunt, right? And then B, with that knowledge, where would I potentially find someone, kind of poking their way into doing, into attacking maybe that turbine remotely over the maintenance highway, right? So with this talk, it was really trying to get into an area that not a lot is talked about openly out there, and also provide, kind of a framework for people to say, okay, well, I don't run a power generation plan and it's not with this OEM. Well, that's fine. Well, the other OEMs require remote maintenance too, right? There is some link, and it's probably not that one-way data diode link you think it is, going across.
I mean, I guess from a threat hunting perspective, I kind of view it as, I think what you're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I see it as like an upside down pyramid. It's like at the top, IT and OT are very, very similar because you're looking at it from a risk standpoint, yada, yada, yada. But as you get further, that risk equation, it's like all of them. It's like it's focused on a different thing. Risk and OT and IT are a different equation. You kind of put, I liken it to that old commercial where you're getting a car loan and you squeeze the balloon and you're either paying here or you're paying here. You're squeezing the balloon for the air to be on the other side for OT. And then to your point, as you dig even deeper, the protocols and all that, I think the hardware variants and protocol variants are heck of a lot more in the OT world than they are in the IT world, because we've come to kind of a level set in the IT world, even though there's still new things coming. But in the OT world, in the IoT world, and all of the different protocols, it's a mess. And that's why I kind of glommed on to your, like, I guess your freeform that you were talking about, freeform threat hunting, because you kind of have to take that stance in an OT environment versus an IT environment. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. And what's interesting with that, right, is you can, like, to the point of freeform versus not, there's certainly, like, frameworks like MITRE ATT&CK are super helpful, right? Because everything in those matrices, in both the ICS specific matrix for things that you can do to PLCs, to RTUs, to other things like that, and the enterprise matrix for all the Windows systems and everything else down there. Um, Certainly, there's a bit of predictable stuff again to where it is a little less freeform, but where it gets more into that freeform is like, okay, hey, this is a GE plant using Mark controllers using this software and this configuration, right? Oh wait, it actually turns out that this plant is in the US and data flows differently than if this plant's in Saudi Arabia, just with regional differences in G, right? And so to your point, like there's that kind of fundamental level, and then there's like the reality of when you go out into the field and you're dealing with, yes, these are all the same PLCs plant to plant, but it's a very different process oftentimes, and some of the like consequences on that, right? From the threat hunting side, it's like, hey, what data is available? Where is it? Like, right, where are my tap points? We go into places when we're doing threat hunts and we're like, okay, you collected a lot of data here. Let's try to get data here to answer these questions, right? And so to your point on freeforming, it's even that challenge of like, okay, what am I dealing with here, to where if I just go into an IT environment and I'm like, hey, give me the boundary firewall traffic, you can get stuff. In the plan, it's a whole different kind of show on what's possible, right?
So let me liken it to my in Texas terms, since we're all Texans here, right? If I'm driving to Buc-ee's, I know where my nearest Buc-ee's is, right? But I could take the route because I'm prepping to go to Buc-ee's. I know I've got to go get my beaver nuggets and my big old coffee and everything, but I know different ways to get there. But as soon as I take one route, I could run into something I was totally unexpecting. There's road work going on, whatever, that kind of thing. Right. And so got to be flexible. I guess my thing is, when you talk about free forming, I mean, it's the same thing, right? Being flexible in your hunt, because you want to prepare. Right. But at the same time, once you open that, once you start that process, you don't know what you're going to run into, and you got to be flexible on running a different route. Right.
Yep. Exactly. And some of the networks are, some industrial networks are fairly simple, right? Few PLCs, maybe a bunch, and they're only speaking Modbus. And then others, you go into like an EMS network or ADMS for power, and you're dealing with dozens of applications. No one really knows how they're communicating. It's kind of the,
You take
okay,
any
what are you
big
interested
industrial
in?
company, right? You're taking that have acquired companies and sites and things throughout
Yeah.
their entire existence, and they're patching all this stuff together to get it work. It's not like they're running a standard playbook across the board and ripping and replacing, right? So that throws another wrench into it.
Yeah. And with threat hunting and with this talk, like what makes me excited on taking it to conferences is, the more we can share as a community, the more we can talk through. Because like we're making it sound a little difficult now. In a lot of ways, there are like fundamental things you can do to where it doesn't have to be that hard, right? And the more we share openly, the better we are off, right? Because as defenders, our advantage is we can openly share. The attackers have to kind of work in their corner, because if they out there certain things, then we know how to defend against it, right?
Yeah.
So, taking this to conferences, talking through stuff, iterating as a community on these topics is huge for pushing the field forward.
Yeah. I guess a question would be, because we've had previous conversations and we've done a whole lot of OT podcasts here recently, because we had a ton of people at HOU.SEC.CON that talked about OT. We talked about not just threat hunting, but and I guess we had a previous kind of a threat hunting talk, but it was also like pen testing in those environments. We've had secure by design. I mean, all of those things in critical infrastructure and OT had to be taken in consideration. And yes, OT is behind the times, but I and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I do feel like there is a really good chance of getting standardized type of structures in plants, even though there's differences of what the plants do. And there's been, the old good old Purdue model, and now the, I like to call chutes and ladders, not zones and conduits. But I mean, there's things there where you can standardize and control that stuff. And in IT environments, that doesn't always, like, it doesn't work, right? Because there are variances there that aren't as structured as you can get in a plant. Does that make sense?
It does, it does. And to your point, like, right, you take like a Schneider M580, right? A very common PLC that you see in everything from data centers to power to everywhere, right? And the function codes, like how that PLC works, short of the ladder logic. Of course, the ladder logic's different, but like you can design entire threat hunts off of saying, okay, they have M580s and they have Moxa switches, and go in with about a 90-95% plan and be ready, right?
Mhm.
And to that point, it's really, again, going back to that attacker and finding threat side, it's like, okay, how many ways are there to attack an M580, right? The good news is like Kaspersky does actually have some interesting CVs you should look at if you have M580s for auth bypassing and stuff. That's, by the way, pretty easily to detect in passive network monitoring and others, right? But the challenge to that point is, or what makes it easier to your point is that side of being like, hey, um, these really are just different Lego bricks. And so if you understand how to secure all of the different Lego bricks, certainly are there going to be weird sites? Absolutely. But you can still work around them.
Well, that's great, man. I really appreciate you doing that. So you're going to try to come out to HOU.SEC.CON again, I'm assuming?
Oh,
In
yeah, we'll be out there
2024?
this year.
Awesome. Well, yeah, you said you're going to sponsor and everything else.
Yep.
I'm really excited about that. Sam always puts together a really good list of fun out there. And then obviously with OT.SEC.CON, focused on that, we really want to bring that visibility out. So I'm excited about you coming out and starting your own thing, even though that means that Sam doesn't get to work with you every day, but
Oh, it's been a few years now. I think, yeah, it's been a few years.
We keep in touch. We run into each other in strange places too. So that's always good.
well, you're not far away too. So, I mean, it's a one Bucky's trip, if I remember correctly, to San Antonio.
Two Bucky's.
Is it two to
Yep.
San Antonio? Okay.
Yeah, you get
It's
no,
two
no,
to
not San
Dallas,
Antonio.
two
You
to
get Brookshire, and then anyway, we're getting
Yeah.
to Bucky's. I'm sorry, but
I told Lauren if Bucky's doesn't make it into the title of this podcast, I'm going to be upset. So,
we should
all
do
right.
securing the big Bucky's car wash. Didn't they build that like quarter of a mile, or is it a tenth of a mile? It's
Yeah,
some
that
ridiculously long car wash.
that really big one. Yep. There's got to be some PLCs in that bad boy.
field trip. I hear a field trip in my future. All right, that's got automation in there.
Dan and Sam and Michael are like walking into the car wash, thinking they're like, "What are y'all doing out here? We're just looking for PLCs. It's cool, don't worry about it." All right, Dan. Any parting words?
No. Looking forward to HOU.SEC.CON. We'll also be at we run community events at all the major conferences. So we have and these are free events open to the community. You just have to register. At Black Hat, we have a dig this, so the operate heavy machinery type deal. We have that booked for like 2 or 3 hours. So if you want to come drive that in the desert, we're doing like 2 to 3 hours of educational talks before. No sales pitches at all there, by the way. And so, so if you want to, we hope to see you at conferences. We're going to have great events like that coming up. RSA, Black Hat. We'll be at S4 also. We're doing a big Jurassic Park movie night. I know Sam's excited on that. And so, no, I mean, we just love to see it. Some of our events, they're openly free, and we try to keep the sales pitch down. So it's all educational.
Very cool. That sounds like a lot of fun. Who doesn't want to operate some heavy equipment in the middle of a desert? That's just good times.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, appreciate it, sir. Thank you for being on here. And hopefully we see you sooner than HOU.SEC.CON since you're right here in Texas. So
Likewise. Thanks for having me on.
Sam, anything on your side?
This was a great conversation. It's love having Dan on, and really appreciate his support with the conference, and just even if he's just showing up doing the talks, but sponsorship, like, that's amazing, and really appreciate it. But love having that intelligence on our being shared out to the community. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us on episode 13, and see you on episode 14. Well, maybe we'll talk about IT and not just
Might be
OT.
time for that. It might be time for that.
Might be time for that. All right, everybody. Thank you. See you on episode 14.